we have a great panel to try to talk about this from many different angles. To my immediate left, Jeffrey Cole is a research professor and director of the Center for the Digital Future at the USC Annenberg School for Communication, also the founder of the World Internet Project, worked in the Clinton and W. Bush administrations worked with them, rather, on media and telecommunications issues, and previously was director of the Center for Communication Policy at UCLA. To his left, Myrna Blythe is Senior Vice President and Editorial Director at AARP Media, overseeing AARP the magazine, AARP Bulletin, the website, book, and broadcast divisions. Previously, she was editor-in-chief and publishing director for Ladies' Home Journal. She's written 2 novels and a nonfiction bestseller. Finally, Joseph Coughlin, director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Age Lab. He teaches policy and systems innovation and is the author of the online publication Disruptive Demographics. Appointed by President George W. Bush, he served on the 2005 White House Conference on Aging Advisory Committee. Thank you all for joining. Let me start with a big, broad question and really encourage you to take it any direction you want. One thing we know is from all the projections from the Social Security trustees and others is that the number of seniors in American society will double from about 40 million today to about 80 million in 2040. A profound demographic change, one of the most profound demographic changes that will shape our society in the coming decades. When you think about all of the ramifications of this for the economy, for culture, for the way we produce and consume media, for the way we live and where we live, what do you think are going to be the biggest changes we're going to experience as this fundamental wave rolls through our society? Joe, do you want to start us maybe?
Well, if you think about it, one of the things that's happening is not just a statistical change of more older people, because although, and I'm going to use the royal we, I'm looking out at the audience, we are not the first to get old. I'm sorry to break the news to all of us, but we are the first to believe that we will be forever youthful. And so while we are aging and we're going to change the demography, probably the thing that's going to change life more than anything else is, and this is where I think we are truly disruptive. We're not just the first to get old, but we have great expectations. How many of you, and you're not going to get out of here without a quiz, how many of you believe you're going to age the same way as your parents? How many of you believe that you're as nice as your parents? I suggest that we don't cope as well as our parents did. We expect more. We expect there to be a product, a service, a policy, or something to invent how we're going to live life tomorrow. And I was trying to think of how to bring this to life, so to speak, and so I brought a little tchotchke with me to get the point across. We don't think about longer life. We use numbers, and I don't think we really process that. What was life expectancy about 1900? Any guesses? 40. So midlife crisis, shall we say, at 47 had a profound impact. So let's think about that. Midlife crisis was about there. Life expectancy now, and the tables are wrong according to the National Academy of Sciences and others, are well up to about 78. And by the way, in the words of the great philosopher Yogi Berra, you can see a lot by looking. The fastest growing part of the population is 85 plus. Ladies and gentlemen, what's going to be different is not the economics, not necessarily the social. We have a longevity dividend of roughly 30 years. It's what we're going to do with that time in health and wealth, working longer, going back to school, not having 1, 2 careers, but 5 careers. So technology, your attitude, and living longer is going to change how all of us, regardless of age, live, work, and play tomorrow.
At AARP, we talk about it as a new series, a section of life full of real possibilities. That, you know, the newest story on earth is a mass of people growing older. That's really never happened before. And so that is changing everything. And the boomers that changed so much over the last 30 or 40 years. Women's roles especially, and there's so many women here. This was the generation that really changed the way women live. We've changed attitudes about diversity. We've changed attitudes about the family. The boomers are the most divorced of all generations. We've changed attitudes about sex. We just did a sex survey at AARP, and the amount of sexual partners that boomers have had through their lifetime, men and women, it was 14 for men, 11 for women. We found that amazing. Think of the no pictures in that issue. And in fact, it may not even be in that issue, as a matter of fact. But just think of the generation before and the way they would have answered a question like that. So we have changed so much. And so the final thing we're going to change is the way people view aging. And just as Joe said, they see it as a time of potential. They see it as a time where they can change careers. And about retirement, which of course was the one part of life, people don't even want to talk about retirement. If they can't, many of them can't. If you have a job, you simply cannot retire. And if you have a career, you often don't want to retire. You want to keep on doing active things. So as I say, this will be the last great change that this demographic does. And it will affect all of us in this room, and will affect our children and our grandchildren, because they will see this as an appropriate way to age for the future.
I can't let this go because you're talking about women in particular, but the highest divorce rate is amongst the 50 plus. 90% of them, the divorces are initiated by women. Why?
Because they know they have years more
No,
to live.
it's worse than that. Guys, I'm sorry. We got to up our game. The number one reason they give, I was hoping it'd be sexual, great pictures. I was hoping it'd be money, not money. You ready for this? Boredom.
Yeah.
He bores me.
Yeah.
Well, first,
I can understand that.
So can my wife. But that's
well, it's great to see this as a whole crowd of boomers. It means we can talk all we want about the millennials. Spoiled brats. So my area is digital and technology and communication. So I'm going to focus on that. And we've spent the last 15 years tracking people, trying to figure out what's a fad and what's transformational. And boomers have been the heaviest users of all forms of digital communication across all of their lives, work, social, all the different parts of their lives. And first, starting with the most important transformation we've seen, that's not a fad among boomers, is empowerment. The power that digital technology has given us in our lives. The power we've gained over journalists. That now we read something and we want to call up or write a journalist and tell him or her how they got it right, or more often, how they got it wrong. The power we've gained over salespeople. The way we buy things, the way we buy automobiles. The old way of buying an automobile where you had to go in and negotiate down from the sticker price, you'd get to an impasse, the salesperson would have to consult the mysterious sales manager in the back room. Now gone, we go in armed with data. The power, importantly, in talking about what Myrna's talking about with aging, the power we're gaining over the medical establishment. That now there's none of us who don't have a sniffle, an itch, or a serious symptom, that we don't look it up on the internet, look at all the possibilities. We come in and see a physician. We want to be a member of the treatment team. We want to discuss possibilities. More often than not, the doctor just wants us to shut up and take our medicine. But we're gaining enormous real power over our political process, all throughout our coming from digital technology, and boomers are really beginning to use that power. We've seen that power in social media. Boomers are the ones who are causing millennials to get off of Facebook. You know, we had predicted 10 years ago that MySpace and Facebook wouldn't survive for teenagers because to them a social medium or a social network is like a nightclub. And when the nightclub becomes too popular or the uncool kids show up, they're out of there. And now what's the worst thing that could happen to you as a millennial in a nightclub? Your mother walks in. Now your mother wants to friend you. You want to friend your kids on Facebook. They don't want to hang around. We'll come back to some of this, but one last very powerful trend we're seeing is we understand this technology changes our lives. We understand sometimes we couldn't leave the office without it. Sometimes we couldn't go on vacation without it. It doesn't mean we have to spend every moment on our vacation being connected. But we're seeing people are now looking for balance of all this technology in their lives. They're looking for ways to enjoy the benefits without experiencing all the disadvantages. This is something we call enough already, E-N-U-F-F. One example of enough already, I'm somebody, I can't go to sleep until I answer all my email. And you know what happens if I answer all my email just before I go to sleep? Damn it, while I'm sleeping, everybody answers me. And it never goes away, and I'm like the rat on the cage. So we're seeing people taking pushback, not liking the fact that we're working Saturday mornings, Sunday nights, Christmas Eve, New Year's Day. And what we're seeing, we had identified a trend, other people had as well, among teenagers and why 90% of teenagers sleep next to their mobile phones. One reason is they don't have watches or alarm clocks, but the other is this acronym many of you may know of, FOMO, the fear of missing out. The fear that something's happening in their social lives, they're not going to know about it until it's too late. But now we're seeing among boomers an even more powerful trend. And I'll stop here. JOMO, the joy of missing out. The people who are trying to show, sometimes with status, if you're Rupert Murdoch, you can shut down for 2 days, and when you come back on, everybody will be there. If you work for Rupert Murdoch, it may not be so simple, but we're trying to look for balance.
If they haven't been arrested.
Yes.
So this is probably not the point to use a break in the conversation to check my email then, right? That could be, okay. I'm going to start, let's look at a couple different segments of society, American life, and talk in specifics about how these changes are going to unfold. And I want to start with the economy and the workplace. Because if you look at the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from 2002 to 2012, very slow economic growth, the labor force participation rate fell for every age group up until 55. And from 55 to 64, it rose. And it rose even more for people 65 plus. So is this happening by choice or by necessity?
No,
Myrna?
by necessity, I think. As I say, people with jobs want to keep jobs. People with careers often don't want to give up careers because that is so much part of their lives and work and status. So I think that's it. And we will see that people will want to continue. In fact, what is the right age for retirement? It's increasing 10 years. Everyone's saying, oh, that's the year it should be. And sometimes never is an answer. So work is, the boomers' work is very important in defining their lives, especially women. At one time it wasn't, and now it is very much so, the way it is for men. One other thing I want to say about millennials, though, when we say we've changed family too, and the sense of there are two things that are quite different for the boomers as they get older. They are caregivers. And that is really new. And there are millions of caregivers, people who are caregiving for their parents when they are in their 50s and 60s. And that never happened before because people in their 50s and 60s did not have 80 and 90-year-old parents. And often they have in the home, yet again, their millennial children who cannot get a job, who have not moved out the way boomers couldn't wait to leave. You mean live with my mother? Never, you know? Now they do. Right. So we see a family structure that is quite different, and that the kind of sandwich generation that was seen at one time, people in their 40s, are often now people in their 50s and 60s. And often that's a reason people keep working. They have to work. They have to work because their children are having a harder time getting jobs.
We'll come back to that. By the way, as we're needling the millennials, let's just keep in mind they now outnumber the baby boomers. So but Joe,
we make more money than
yeah, there you go, Joe. But in terms of this question of choice or necessity in more people staying in the workforce later in life, you had an article not long ago where you talked about an analysis of financial records from the online service freeretirementreport.com that found, quote, baby boomers may have to work another 10 years to offset poor planning, loss of income, taxes, inflation and other factors that have devastated their savings and turned their 401ks into 201ks. So what is, I mean, you know, obviously...
Someone's actually reading that stuff?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
so talk a little bit about why you think we're seeing more participation later in life in the
I think we're seeing more participation, and this is, by the way, not just the United States. If you look around the world at OECD data, 21 countries, people are working first because of the money. And I love that there was some data from 2010 from AARP that 40% of those who said they were going to work longer plan to work until they drop, which is a different type of retirement plan, if you will. But the other reasons are social meaning, connectivity. A person has to have a reason to get up in the morning. But I think the boomers are not just generation attitude. I think that longer life is something that we now need to renegotiate and revisit the social contract. We can't simply say we're living longer, so we have to take existing institutions and ideas and straight line in my head. So part of working longer, yes, for money and meaning, but also we need to rethink of working longer past what? How many of you really think that being 60 today is the same as being 60 20 or 30 years ago? How many of you really believe that your education from 0 to 21 or 0 to 25 is going to last you a lifetime when technology like this is only 4 or 5 years old and it's the new normal? So I would suggest to you that it's not just about working longer for money. This generation, one of our legacies has got to be inventing new institutions around longevity. So that means going to school for a lifetime, whether it's online, in person, and no, that doesn't mean a kegger. I'm talking about schools as great as Georgia Tech have got master's degrees out there now in computer science for $7,000 online to make the business case for you to be in the workplace. This means for you not to have 1 or 2 or 3 careers, but maybe 5 careers over a lifetime. That's what we have to teach the millennials.
Let's talk a little later about what that means for the public retirement programs and the safety. Go ahead, real quick.
One thing about aging, though, and people are very positive, as I keep saying, when we ask who's old, I'm not old, he's old. In other words, people deflect it. The one area, though, there is sensitivity about age is in the workplace. And I mean, we had comments from people sort of saying, there used to be a woman here who was older than me, and everyone sort of knew that. She's gone. Now I'm worried they're looking at me. So there is still ageism in the workplace, and we can't pretend that there isn't. And so, as I always say, the 50s are like the 40s when everything's going great. They're like the 60s when you've lost your job because you're an older worker. So that is both, yes, people want to work, but there are, we know that we at AARP, we've talked about training programs for people learning the technology that they need, how to present themselves, and that's a real concern of what happens when someone loses their job at 57 and 58 and knows they still have to work for another 10 years.
Jeffrey, all this fabulous technology we've been talking about, does it change the equation? Does it make it possible for more people to work longer?
Of course it does. Incidentally, if you're really sensitive about your age, we've made it practically impossible to fib about your age anymore. And there's records everywhere of when we were born and how old we were. But absolutely, it means more people can work at home, although our great experiment with telecommuting has not been as successful as people would have liked it to have been. We discovered that most people weren't self-disciplined enough to work at home. The people who were most effective at working at home were the ones who got up at the same time, importantly got dressed, had some dedicated workspace, whether it was a bedroom or a separate place where their families would treat them as if they were at work, but the ability to work not only through distance, but the different kinds of tasks we do. We estimate, looking at Department of Labor classifications, that about 50% of people can work outside of an office at least a third of the time. So technology makes it much easier to work outside the home. And as we know, the smartphone has become the center of our entire work and social universe. Interestingly, a place I don't usually look to understand the importance of technology in our life, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that they're not allowed to search our cell phones when we're stopped for a traffic ticket or arrested without a warrant. But in making that decision, Chief Justice Roberts talked about how there had never been anything like this in our lives before that has all of our personal information, pictures, all of this central part of our lives, and it was a unanimous decision. And on this court, you rarely see a unanimous decision, and I think a harbinger of more privacy cases and digital technology to come. And it's great to know that it was unanimous. But I think that smartphones and working at home, all of this make it possible. Incidentally, just 1 or 2 quick anecdotes about smartphones. We found people, this is especially, and I said boomers are the heaviest users of smartphones. We found people almost never lose their smartphones. They can drop them in the gutter and they can shatter. They can be stolen, and smartphone theft is a big deal. But we almost never lose them. And the reason we almost never lose them is that if it falls out of your purse or pocket onto the seat, you won't make it even halfway to the door before you're reaching for it. You can't get far enough away from it to notice it's gone. And just one other, just totally anecdotal, I have one of these, sorry, I have one of these big screen smartphones. And frequently my friends will say, can I look at it? And the answer is, of course you can look at it. And there's nothing on my phone that I wouldn't want any of you to see. But I notice that if you're holding my smartphone for 30 seconds, after about 30 seconds, I'm starting to get uncomfortable. And I'm saying to myself, I want it back, damn it, that's mine. So I think these are the things.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up? So is it or is it not the case that with technology accelerating so fast, does that put older workers at a disadvantage in the workplace, that they are less likely to be early adapters and comfortable with whatever is the next new thing?
And AARP is the one who pioneered this. If you look at the non-users of technology, 88% of Americans are online. 12% of Americans are not. Although some of that 12% have children or spouses who go online for them, we call them but 12% are not online themselves. Most of that 12% are people over the age of 65. But keep in mind, most people over the age of 65 are online. And the thing that has made what you're talking about not happen anymore is what Joe held up, the tablet, 4 years old. Many people were never going to learn the PC. PC was needlessly complex, took a long time to learn, took 4 minutes to boot, 1 out of every 30 times encountered the blue screen of death. Whereas a tablet, you hand a tablet to a 3-year-old boy or an 83-year-old grandmother, within 5 minutes both will be using it. The only difference is within 5 minutes the 3-year-old will be teaching you things. There's no boot process. If you log off of your computer forgetting to do something, you negotiate with yourself, is it important enough to go back and bother to wait? You don't do that on a tablet. Tablets change everything.
AARP is producing a tablet of our own with Intel, which will be in the stores in the fall, just before Christmas, which will have on it lots of AARP material, but also the ability that if you have a problem with the tablet, you can call someone and they will always be online to help you. So it will be a human, but whatever. But we see a market for that, even that 12% who aren't. So as I say, we do a tech program all over the country now, because that is the one area that when we tested about aging, the one thing they felt concerned about, with some anger. Those kids, you know, they don't know how to write a letter, or they don't know anything. But it was partly an anger about they know something we don't know to some degree, a small portion, and that we're trying to address that with the tablet and with
really
yes, it will be a tablet.
Equal playing field.
And you've been great at now at your annual conference. You offer tablets.
Yes, we offer.
Joe,
Just for those of you who get annoyed at grandchildren and whatever that know how to do this technology very quickly, I want to submit to you that the children, our children and grandchildren, are going to age far faster than any of us. And what I mean by that is that the technology is moving so quickly that we are already seeing in our lab differences between kids that are 10 and 12 and kids in their 20s. Because if you're in your 20s, you'll immediately swipe every technology you touch because that's your new model. The 10, 12-year-olds, they talk to it. Otherwise, they throw it away. So all of a sudden, you're going to be old and outdated by 35 unless you stay on top of your game.
Let me ask you, I want to go back, I want to nudge us forward to another area, and it is your tape measure where you started. If you look at that change is not evenly distributed across the population. It's rising for everybody, but it's rising faster for people with advanced education and income.
As it always has.
As always have. You look at the latest estimates are that life expectancy for white women without a high school diploma is 73.5. White women with a college degree or more, 83.9. White men without, 67.5. White men with 80.4, almost 13 years different in life expectancy. So is length of life becoming the ultimate form of income inequality?
It has always been, it's not so much an income inequality, but lifestyle inequality. It's a matter of health literacy, it's financial literacy, it's saving, but it's also the type of jobs. I'm less likely to drop dead from sitting underneath these lights in front of a keyboard than a guy who is one of my family members who actually works for a living, that is, build sidewalks and build houses. So yes, there's income inequality, education inequality, but there's also fundamentally different on how we've lived our lives as well.
And I was saying about women, part of the reason men's lives are lengthening saying is because of the tremendous increase in knowledge about heart disease that men have been treated for, while women, it is the #1 cause of death in America, heart disease, not breast cancer, not lung cancer, and it has been ignored until recently by the medical profession. Women's heart when they have a heart attack, they often have very different symptoms and are often sent home being told they have stress. There are changes in that now, but that's why men's lives have increased. It is the statins. It is the knowledge about heart disease.
About technology, just follow up one thing on Joe. But so when you talk about people having 3, 4, 5 careers, this being this length of life being this new canvas to paint on, is that fundamentally different for people who are in kind of knowledge work than people who are in those more? What does the future look like? The aging look like for people who are not at the upper ends of the income and education ladder? What is their retirement look like?
We cannot address longevity and healthy longevity until we also address how we do education. So we're celebrating here technology that's getting us to live longer and technology to get us to live better. We're also going to have to make sure that we understand that everyone has an education to remain adaptable to their changing life cycle, changing jobs, and the like. The bottom line is the future of retirement is the Red Queen effect. You're going to have to run faster and faster just to stay in place.
Is everyone going to have to work longer? Everyone, not only people who work in front of a keyboard, but people who lift boxes on the Walmart
I think that
loading
one of the
dock?
fundamental policy discussions we're going to have in this country is not just about extending retirement depending on what you do, but a whole new social contract between those who work with their bodies and those who worry about how their fingers feel.
Where does technology fit in? Yeah.
Yeah, I genuinely believe that some of the technology we'll look at really can extend lifespan. 2 examples of that are the wristbands. You're seeing more and more that give us information, that let us monitor and recognize that there's problems even before our physicians might recognize them. And a technology, and I get no cut in this, a technology that if you're not familiar with, go out and learn, the Microsoft Kinect. K-I-N-N-E-C-T. Some of you may know Microsoft introduced this 6 years ago, simultaneously made a foolish and smart decision. The smart decision was they made it an attachment to the Xbox, and they sold 15 million within 6 months. The foolish part of that was they stereotyped it as a gaming device. And it is a phenomenal gaming device. And what the Kinect does is you have no passwords, you stand in front of it, and it recognizes your body. It takes 240 pictures of your body. You never have to sign in again. I don't know what happens if you gain 25 pounds. Either you re-register, or I guess you gain it so slowly it adjusts. But it is a phenomenal medical device. It can monitor everyday blood pressure, pulse, blood sugar. Doctors do interview when you're standing in front of the Kinect. You can do exercise, and it can measure all of your stress levels. It is $100. You can buy it. You don't even need an Xbox anymore. You can attach it to your television set. It's an absolutely phenomenal device that's going to let us be partners in our aging process and potentially deal with it.
In your mind, real quick, is the implication of that not only a university professor but a home healthcare worker will be physically able to work later into their 60s, into their 70s? I mean, does it change the reality for everybody?
I think the only reality, absolutely it changes the reality for everyone. The only people who are not going to be working into their 80s in all likelihood are going to be manual laborers. And we have fewer of those than we've had in the past.
And by the way, that's the follow.
Service workers.
And
service workers, there's no reason service workers can't work as long as they choose to work.
And when we see changes, people are trying to change their health. I mean, the boomers are odd in a way. They invented fitness, Jane Fonda, all that. Yet at the same time, they have greater obesity rates and diabetes than their parents did. So it's a double-edged thing. Yet at the same time, we see all the time people saying, I am going to try control of my health. We're just doing an article called The Health Reimagineers, people who say, no, I don't want to. I want to be as healthy as I can, and people can improve their health. I think in the New York Times there was an article just last weekend about a trainer who works with people in their 80s and 90s in one of the communities in New York where there are older workers. I think someone else read it too. And we said, this is a great article. Obviously, people can get healthier, can get fitter at every age, and I think people are recognizing that and wanting to be like that. people don't want to be old. They want to be as healthy, as fit, as vital as they can. They don't want to accept that they are old. And I think that's the great change of what boomers have done.
Just a quick footnote on technology. We tend to, when we think of technology, tend to think of what we see in Best Buy. The stuff that you're not seeing that's happening by stealth that's even more powerful is what's happening in robotics. So for the guy who does make sidewalks, for the guy who does work on the assembly line, we're now seeing robotics being able to augment that 50 and 60-year-old. You know, BMW and companies like that are investing more in robotics on the line, not just because they can't find Germans because they're dying faster than they're being born and the average worker is older, but also so that they can improve the quality to have that 55-year-old who actually knows how a BMW is made and how the robot can help keep him on the line to transfer that knowledge into quality.
One issue is mobility, right? As you have more people getting older, and one question is, how are people going to get around? Will they want to live in more dense environments, or will they rely more on developments like the Google car?
We got into this, and we got a vigorous debate before. I think the most exciting development that I'm going to live to see is the driverless car.
I keep saying I want to live to own a driverless car.
You're going to be able to buy one in California next year.
Yes.
They've done 1.5 million miles on the highways in California. The big problem
It's an experimental vehicle.
It is absolutely an experimental vehicle
there's
about to
a big
become a non-experimental vehicle. One of the biggest problems they had in California was people were freaking out when they were seeing cars without drivers. They had to hire people to sit in the cars, not to touch anything. But think about, and Joe will give you a slightly different view, think about the world of driverless cars. First, and now for me as a boomer who works, I am going to sit in the back of my car. Of course, my car is going to change because manufacturers are now going to focus on the back seat. They're going to make it a sofa where you can sleep, or an office where you can work, with an entertainment center. I'm going to get to work.
The birth rate may pick up.
It may indeed. We're too old, though. Our cars are going to drop us at work. They're going to go off and park somewhere where it's cheap or free. They'll come back and pick us up unless we call them on our smartphones. What we're looking at potentially, and this is where I think it gets exciting, and this is where it is 30 years in the future, we're going to have to get to the point we're not going to let people drive. Because if it's only the cars that are driving, all of a sudden we have no accidents, we have no need for auto insurance, drunk driving comes to an end, blind people can get around as much as they want, and boomers, as they may be less mobile, one of their biggest problems is getting to work or the incredible trauma of losing your driver's license.
Has your computer never crashed? The technology will be 98% effective. And I'm not saying it's not coming, it is. And we're doing research in my own lab with a number of organizations. It is coming. But the transition is going to be a little longer than I think that we would all like it to be. Think of the following transition. You're going off the automated highway. You've been doing your email, maybe even had a drink. Now you're going on the highway that's not automated. How do you drive with a robotic driver next to you? And then you're driving with the software between your ears. The states have to build the infrastructure so the car actually knows where it is. It's not all going to be satellite. So yes, it is coming. But so's Christmas. I mean, it's...
You're saying, has your computer ever crashed? Has your car that you drive ever crashed? We're talking about 45,000 people a year killed in America on the highways. So am I saying it's 100%?
No.
But what I'm going to say, though, whether it's a driverless car or many other products, remember that by the end of this year, 2014, every member of the boomer generation will be over 50. At the moment, and my statistic says 50 plus, there are 104 million people. If everyone 50 plus was in a national economy, it would be the third largest in the world. China, America, and the 50 plus population of America. So there will be many products created for this economy. And the driverless car is one, but there may be many, many more. Interestingly enough, one industry already recognizes it, and it's kind of funny. It's the movie industry. Because kids do not go to movies the way people 50 plus do. That's why you're seeing the Marigold movies, the Billy Crystal movies, the many movies for grown-ups. That's what we call it at AARP. They have recognized that these are the people who still go out for dinner and a movie. And so they're making movies for this audience.
So much of pop culture, though, the focus on even the ratings, all they measure is the demographic, 18 to 49.
This is the great mistake of advertising. I think everyone recognizes and is enraged by it. In truth, the largest, the most successful network is CBS. That has a demographic of the oldest demographic. In fact, network television now is for boomers, even though they don't want to recognize it.
The conventional wisdom in the advertising business was that once you're past 49, but especially past 34, you no longer sample new products. You're stuck in your ways with your detergent and your deodorant, and therefore you want to focus on 18 to 34. I don't think the laughing indicate, where did the whole automobile Lexus come from? Not with millennials, it came from boomers. That's, of course, a fallacy. The networks have slowly moved that up and now care a little bit about you till you're about 55. But as Myrna's talking about, they're the ones still watching network television. They're a few people who watch on a schedule. That's all beginning to shift. And happily, as we're moving into a Netflix universe and an HBO Go universe, ratings don't mean as much anymore anyway, because it's not an advertiser-supported medium, and boomers are showing outsized influence.
The bottom line is if it's high-tech, high-style, high-priced, it's the over 50 market that's powering it.
And the idea that, they can't change your product. I started a magazine called More that women here may know. And when I talk to advertisers, I used to say they're the most divorced generation in history. If they can change their husband, they can change the product.
The audience a couple minutes for questions. I'm going to bring him in a little while, but let me ask us about another related area. Where are people going to live? And how is that going to change cities and suburbs as we go from 40 to 80 million seniors? What do you think it's going to change in terms of the kind of the spatial layout of
right now?
70%
of all people all Americans over age 50 live in suburban or rural areas. So transit 70%. Wow. So transit either is far away or not something you're going to wake up at 85 and say, I think I'll take the bus. The question is whether they will move to, quote, more livable communities. Those are communities that have the accessibility, the intensity of activities that you like, and the density. Even when the economy was going gangbusters, very few people moved to the beach or to Fairway. What we're finding for those few that are starting to move, maybe 9%, maybe, they're going to college communities. They've got things to do. They've got good coffee shops. And by the way, they're going to places like Ann Arbor. You're not going there for the weather. But they also have something else in common. They all have really good medical facilities. So that may be where they move. But for now, the data seem to indicate what our parents did. That by the time you're 50, your marriage, your mortgage, your memories are in that house where you live, you're probably not moving.
Does technology change where people retire or move to retire?
It potentially can, but I think Joe made a pretty important point about hospitals and universities, continuing education. In theory, technology can mean that you can live further out, where you can have a bigger house, less taxes, less pollution, theoretically less crime because homes are occupied more often. But that hasn't really turned out to happen as much as people predicted it would. We're seeing a rebirth of some cities, but I think there's becoming we're beginning to see a little bit of a disenchantment, except among the very rich in our biggest, best cities like New York.
AARP is running livable cities.
Disenchantment
with the cities?
Not being able to have the kind of life they want in our biggest San Francisco, Los Angeles,
just because the
New
cost
York.
of living is too high?
Cost of living and
Can I, Myrna, before you jump in, I want to put one more factor on the table in terms of where people live and how they're going to live. It's a number from your new magazine, which is sitting outside for people to get on their way out. In your survey, 1980, 12% of Americans reported living in multi-generational households, now 17%.
Right.
So how does that change choices about where people are living?
The kids are back. They haven't gotten a job. They're down in the basement. And it's very difficult to live with adult children. Take it from one who knows. Are you supposed to worry when they're not home, when they're 28, things like that. And also caregiving. As I keep saying, AARP is very, very focused on the great needs of caregivers. And, you know, and in truth, boomers, because the generation before, there are many boomers, and so there are caregivers for our parents. Boomers did not have as many children, and one of the concerns is there will not be caregivers for boomers. Also, we're seeing a population of boomers who are living alone, which we have never seen such a great population of people who are divorced or never married or things like that.
40% of women over 65 in the United States live by themselves.
Yes,
We only have 3 minutes till we bring in the audience. 43%.
43%.
yes, and that's being widowed and divorced as
Real
well.
quick, before we bring in the audience. You talked about renegotiating the social contract. 1969, federal government, OMB, as they classify federal spending, 1/3 was classified as investment in the future, infrastructure, R&D, education, 1/3 payments to individuals. Today, 62% is payments to individuals, 16% is investments in the future as they classify it. One's doubled, one's shrunk in half. We're going from 40 to 80 million seniors, people are living longer. What are the implications for public budgets, and can programs exist in their current form through that entire wave?
I guess I reject the assumption that investment in individuals at any age is not an investment in the future. If I am working longer, if I am starting new companies, which, by the way, women over 45 are starting second number of companies, not some kid in Silicon Valley with more jobs. So I reject the idea that because we're investing in any one generation, as long as they're contributing, that we're not investing in the future.
And in truth, you know, AARP, of course, is very concerned in supporting the necessary entitlements. About 50% of those on Social Security live on Social Security. We don't think at AARP that things will change, things could be modified or things like that, but also realize that when people get the money from the government, that goes back into the economy. It isn't money they keep and put in their pocket. They spend it. They need to spend it. So it's not quite the statistics that sound like, oh, this is being given away and is not part of the economy that we need.
Do you think the generational tilt of the federal budget as the baby boom moves into retirement will continue, or there will be pushback?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Not my area of expertise, but I'm a concerned citizen. I think that we're seeing enormous pushback on pensions and quite a few other things. I don't think we're going to be able, the budget as it's envisioned for the next 30 years is clearly not sustainable.
All right, let's bring in the audience. Do we have microphone, by the way?
All those shy boomers.
We got a question right
boomers.
over here. We got a couple. Maybe the gentleman first, and then the woman behind him.
Yeah. Hello. I'm a couple things. I'm going to be 68 years old tomorrow, so you can all say happy birthday. And I'm a PhD clinical psychologist, so I have a different bent on this thing. With that said, I think a lot of my friends have turned into people we used to make fun of in 1968. So we go around, and I think each subsequent generation does this. My parents probably said it about my grandparents, da-da-da-da, that we're different than them, we're this, we're that, whatever. What I'd like the group to comment on is, do we do this issue a service by grouping all 92 or 97 million people in one category, or do we have to break into it and create substrate? Obviously, the people in this room are a hell of a lot different than in Selma, Alabama, or Long Island, or whatever, for a variety of different reasons. So can we get better at, not just AARP, but can we get better at the research and saying, all boomers do this, or 80% of, because we don't. Quite honestly, we don't.
I think that's one of the greatest differences of boomers and other generations. Other generations tended to work in lockstep. At 65, you retired, you played golf, he came home for lunch, oh my God, you know, better, worse, not for lunch, you know the joke. And the boomers aren't like that. They are very, very different. You know, somebody still wants maybe a traditional retirement. Somebody else is starting a new business. So you could put people on a street all the same age, and they'd all be doing different things as boomers. I mean, there are boomers who have very young children. 6 or 7-year-old children because of the great changes in the ability for women to stay fertile, or different things like that. You can have a child in your mid-40s today. Or that's remarkable difference. So I'd say, if anything, boomers are very different from each other and respect each other for being different.
About them like they are. We use it globally. Boomers do this, boomers do that,
Well, younger and older boomers are different too.
Very different,
And that's
yeah.
another.
I mean,
great difference.
largely it's due to academic and media shorthand. It's just easier to say baby boomers as it is to say millennials. I mean, the idea that a younger boomer and an older boomer have anything in common is actually quite comical. And turning 68, happy birthday, but one of them's doing it every 8 seconds. The fact of the matter is, quite seriously, if you do the numbers, but the fact is that because of the size, because of the attitude, and because of the education and wealth, there's a higher percentage of lifestyle leaders in this generation than there were previous generations. And because, frankly, we did a great job of destroying institutions and having the lack of trust, we're creating new lifestyles that have not been imagined by our parents or grandparents.
Against the wind.
And can I just put in a plug for my friend Timothy Greenfield Sanders, who has just done a documentary for PBS called The Boomer List, where he interviews one person born each year from 1946 through 1964 to tell the story of the generation and the differences within that generation. It's going to be on PBS on American Masters in September 23rd, and is the basis for a exhibit at the Newseum for 9 months, from October till June. So it's a great celebration of the many different parts of the boomer generation.
Was that date chosen because it's Bruce Springsteen's birthday? Perfect boomer convergence.
I'm seeing some evidence of discrimination coming from the medical community toward people in our age group. And I'm wondering if the boomers are going to be able to protect ourselves from that.
In what way discrimination?
Well, it's for instance, there's a stroke drug that is a miracle drug that if it's administered in time, the stroke just unravels and goes away. The face rises, the hands work again, the leg moves.
It
a
has to be
miracle
given a
drug.
certain amount of hours, and really it is knowing if the emergency room you go to has the drug.
It's not only that whether they have the drug, but whether they will administer it to, for instance, people above 80. In Houston, most of the hospitals do not administer the drug to anyone over the age of 80, which everybody needs to call up and find out where you can get the drug if you need it. And I'm hearing talk that says it's an expensive drug, maybe we should spend it on a 5-year-old who needs emergency treatment instead of an 80-year-old who needs emergency treatment.
And maybe that's part of what
Are we going to be able to handle that?
And maybe that's part of the
protect
measuring
ourselves from
tape discussion I was having, which is renegotiating the contract. 85, 95 sounds really old, and then you start having these philosophical discussions of how long to prolong life. 95 sounds really old until you're 94.
That's right. Who wants to be a 100-year-old man, a 99-year-old man?
Generally speaking, the fact that people over 65 are covered by Medicare, have a payment stream attached to them, gives them an advantage over a working age population, which large numbers of people are still, and even after Obamacare, will be uninsured. In terms of if you're at the hospital, you're more confident you're getting reimbursed for treating a senior than you are for a 40-year-old who's uninsured. So wouldn't that always be kind of a competitive
Actually, you have
advantage?
many hospitals that are really backing out of the Medicare market. And
Many doctors who are backing out of it, so it's a very complicated issue.
All right, let's see. Any more questions? We got one up here. Hold on, the microphone is coming. There you go.
Howdy. I don't hear much discussion about the Fountain of Youth.
I'm looking for Hair Club for Men.
Yeah,
myself.
I'm the president, not just a member. But when I refer to that, I'm talking about water. I went from drinking very little water to 1.5 gallons a day, and it virtually changed my life. It changed my mind function. It changed a lot of my physical aspects. And yet I bring it up in a lot of seminars and talks about health, And there's just very little emphasis on it.
I think part of it's because we're talking about health. If this generation can leave anything to our kids, it's redefining the discussion not in terms of health. How many diseases do you have? 110 million Americans have one chronic condition, 60 million have 2, and 30 million have 5. Now it's got to be, how do you live to be vital, to do all the things you want to do? So that may mean exercise and water drinking and all those things, not just to manage a condition, but to live well. And that's part of the health literacy we're not hearing about. We need now to really start to empower everyone to live better, not just longer.
Let's see, do we have any more? Unfortunately, all the way in the back. Yes. Question.
I have a friend about a question about digital technology and the impact on our lives. I have a friend who wears one of the bands, and he can tell you how many hours of REM sleep he has and how many hours that he's in twilight sleep, and the whole exercise regime, and et cetera, and he spends his life as a slave to his band, and I'm going to tell him about this Kinect, and he's going to go crazy. Are you at all concerned about too much information and information overload and what it does to us?
Of course. This begins to morph into the big data discussion. We've never, and big data usually means the information that Google or Facebook collect or the NSA collects, but in our own lives, we're living lives of big data and too much information. And your friend's being a little silly. I mean, these are devices that are supposed to guide you, not become obsessive. And they're growing in importance. Now you'll see some people with 4 or 5 of them, which is really silly. But the REM sleep is a really interesting part of the Nike Fuel Band and the Fitbit Flex, where you can find out how much real sleep you're getting, how much rest. We of course know sleep is more important than we've ever known it to be. But to be a slave to it is just silly. And to be a slave to the Kinect, these are guidelines, these are goalposts, these are ways of trying to understand and be able to predict where problems may come down the line, but not.
What about technology's role in not only assessing how you're doing, but augmenting and improving how you're doing? Is it going? Are we going to see continued advances, and will those perhaps further widen the gaps in life expectancy that we see according to resources?
We're moving out of the wristbands. We're moving into now clothing. That's going to do a lot more.
Implantables are coming
digitally
fast.
wired clothing. If you look at Google Glass is simply, now there's this big backlash against Google Glass. The people who use them are now called glass holes. But that's not my line. I wish it were.
Take credit.
No, I can't take credit for what I did. But what Google Glass is trying to do is very powerful. Very quickly, the internet started with a PC on the desk and a hard wire to the wall. And then the first mobile internet we had was the laptop, which let us put the internet literally on our laptop. And then the smartphone let us put it here. And now Google Glass lets us put it here. My cynical friends say that's just a stopgap measure till we implant the chip in the brain. But the idea of having this information with you without even turning your head is fascinating. There was a woman cited for driving in California while wearing Google Glass. She claimed it made her a better driver because she didn't have to look at her navigation. The police officer cited her for distracted driving, and the judge decided he wasn't going to go anywhere near that and threw it out. But this technology is going to give us even more information, and it's not just going to be about what's in front of us, it's going to be about our bodies, and we are going to be able to use a lot of it.
The unconscious gift that we will give generations after us is that environments that are safer, environments that can measure your health and actually get ready for environments like this room, your car, and the like to change based upon how you're feeling. They'll detect whether you're stressed, fatigued, whatever it is, and having change. But the gift that we're going to give to other generations is that because there are so many of us that are living longer and will be more concerned with our health, we're going to have communities that are easier. Health will become a priority everywhere we go. Education will be across the lifespan. Because one of the things we know from business, you can't build an old man's car, an old man's anything, because a young man or a young woman won't buy it, but neither will an old man. And so as we change things to make it better for us, believe it or not, no one complains about something that's too safe, too healthy, too fun, or too easy. That may be our legacy as we check out.
Question back in the back.
I just want to go back to the workforce now, accepting boomers as they want to work older or work on in their years. How this will affect the millennials or the boomers or corporations in deciding who to hire. Can they keep people that long? Will there be opportunity to stay in a corporation?
We just started a program on that in the lab. In the labor market, there's this mythology that there's a line of people and that the people that are still in the building are taking up the seats of the people who want to come in the building. Huge myth. Labor is lumpy. There are huge job openings, and the question around healthcare. The average doctor out there is 53. There is not a large line of doctors coming into the workforce. The average nurse is 49. Not a long line of people wanting to be nurses or petrochemical engineers. So what we're finding is in certain areas, particularly in high tech, believe it or not, we're short on people, whether it's defense contracting, petrochemical, whatever it might be. So we need the boomers to stay in there, not just to do the work, but here's the part of the things that most companies don't understand. While HR and the CFO are sitting over here saying, we need to give these people, euphemism, package to get out because we can save money, the people who actually run the business are going, does anyone remember the relationships with the clients and how we actually did this? That's in the mind of the 50 plus. That's the so-called lost knowledge. So we need to get the millennials, not just jobs, but we may need to get them to be far more adaptable to go where the jobs are, not just where the jobs are that they want.
We have one over here and one over there. So let's get these last two and then I think we're done. That one and then here. Go ahead.
In taking a look at the boomers as leaders and really wanting to be involved, and as they're getting older, what do you see in regards to the quality of communities versus nursing homes, but different types of communities that are going to be more active, spa-like, just not letting the boomers feel like they are old and that they are vital, because we are.
If anything, people want to stay in their own home. Right. They don't want to be, and now mostly caregivers know there are now assisted living, which is not nursing homes. That's a complicated issue because assisted living, nursing homes have a lot of legislation about them. Assisted living does not. So this is both a problem and a solution. But in general, people want to stay in their own home. And that, again, is what technology is really looking at. How people can stay in their own home.
Let's try to squeeze in two more, I think. Yeah. Here's one.
My question was really around this assisted living craze that you see going up. I mean, we live outside. We live in Washington, D.C., and you see these things going up all over the place. And I mean, what is the trend? Are more and more boomers living in these places, or is it just sort of status?
It's the parents of boomers. That's what I said. There is a real change. Boomers are caregivers. I don't think I have one friend who doesn't have a parent, often not where they live, that they are concerned about. So it is assisted living, but there was a big PBS show about it. Assisted living does not have the legislative controls that nursing homes, bad as they may be, have. So that's what the growth in that industry is. But it also, there is a great need for it. But it isn't for even the oldest boomers. Remember, boomers are 50 to 68 at this moment. They are for people in their 70s and 80s. And yes, they are living longer. Their children are taking care of them. Often they're at a distance from them. These are what is fueling.
One last question, I think.
Average age going into assisted living, just as a data point, is 83 years old.
83. Oh, right. Yeah, 83.
And it has the acuity of what 10 years ago you would have put into a nursing home.
Right.
Sorry, just not so much a question, but a brief statement and announcement about some resources. My name is Todd Breifogel, and I direct the seminars program for the Aspen Institute. We're talking about a completely new world, as everyone has said. And one of the things we do at the Institute is give people opportunities to think about how to make decisions about that new world. AARP has an amazing program called Life Reimagined, so check it out online, lifereimagined.org, how to explore those real possibilities. Aspen Institute has been doing for 65 years seminars on leadership, including self-leadership. So here is our Reese's Peanut Butter Cup moment. Aspen Institute and AARP Life Reimagined have teamed up for a 4-day seminar experience to help you think through what to do next in life and work. how to think about purpose, how to think about quality of life, how to think about making a difference in renegotiating the social contract. So there's information here. You can look at it at lifereimagined.org. You can also look at Aspen Life Reimagined. What could be better than Aspen Life Reimagined? And go into this new world with some serious resources and peer discussion about how to live life well. So thank you.
Let me ask you, thank you. Let me ask you something real quick before you get out the door. Try to be quick. And you can be serious or wry. But 50, 60, 70 years from now, when the last baby boomers leave the scene, what will be the most important way that they changed America?
New expectations for old age being living longer but better.
That's right. I would say they've changed many things. Changing the way people age will be their last great change that matters.
And being vital until the very end.
Oh, right. Great. And this conversation was vital until the very end. So thank you. This great panel. Off to the day.